Hi, this is Phil Newman from Longevity.Technology, and I'm joined today by the CSO of GlycanAge, Professor Gordan Lauc. Gordan, hello.
Hi, nice to talk to you.
Great. So, Gordan, we've got a lot to talk about today, but maybe we could start by addressing really the role that immune health and inflammation play in health span and longevity.
So we have all heard about inflammation, and depending on the context, some people would say it is good, some people would say it is bad. And evolutionary, it is essential. We cannot survive without inflammation because inflammation is a process how we kill invaders. So if there is a bacteria or a virus attacking our body, we kill it with inflammation. So we send our army to destroy the enemy. But in the same process of destroying the enemy, we destroy a bit of ourselves. So we kill our own cells. And usually when there is inflammation, there is pain, there is a reddish color all around. So we see something is going on. But the problem as we are getting older is that there is a more and more small inflammatory processes happening all around the body. And this is called the low-grade chronic inflammation. Low grade because we don't see it, it's a minor things, and chronic because it's happening all the time. And this is consuming huge amount of energy. And this is also inducing small damages all around the body, small scars which leave after the inflammation. And the research has clearly shown that many complex diseases have inflammation in their background. And actually, as we are getting older, more and more we should consider inflammation as our enemy, especially this low-grade chronic inflammation. And there is even a model of aging called inflammaging, meaning more inflammation causes aging, then aging at the molecular level would be loss of function of specific molecules, which then causes more inflammation, which then causes more damage, more aging, and so on. So this is the inflammation process. So the idea is what we are all trying to do as we are getting older, to somehow suppress this inflammation and live with less inflammation.
Gordon, let's talk about how GlycanAge looks at the state of the immune system and inflammation, and how does this actually help us determine biological age?
So I think we should start with the word glycan, because glycan is something which not so many people are familiar with. And this is actually a post-translational modification of proteins, which makes protein more diverse. So a single polypeptide will come in the form of many different proteoforms or different glycoforms, which enable multiple novel functions. And many functions of a complex organisms, meaning multicellular organisms, are by part regulated by glycans, and inflammation is one of them. So all the proteins which participate in inflammation are glycosylated. And these glycans regulate activity of these proteins. And my lab is studying glycosylation for over 3 decades now. We focus on protein glycosylation, and we study it in many different contexts, different diseases, development, evolution, inflammation, and so on. And one of the first things we learned when we started to look at the large population cohorts, and so far we analyzed over 200,000 different people, is that the glycans change a lot with age. So as we are getting older, our glycans are changing. We are having different glycan structures attached to our immunoglobulins, which modulate functions of our immunoglobulins. So as we are getting older, our immunoglobulins become more and more pro-inflammatory. And then it was actually 10 years ago, we developed this concept of GlycanAge, meaning this is an index where we quantify these glycan structures in immunoglobulins, and we estimate biological age based on glycans, meaning I measure my IgG glycans, and then I compare the levels of individual structures to everybody else in the population and say, I look like an average 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old person. And this is one of the indexes of biological age. There are many different indexes globally. But what makes GlycanAge different from others is that most of the other indexes would be based on molecules without a known function. Especially if we're talking about epigenetic clocks, you look at different methylation sites where you don't really know what they do. For glycans, we know that they're based, for the GlycanAge, we know that it is based on molecules with a specific function in the regulation of inflammation. So if people have a higher GlycanAge, this means more inflammation, more low-grade chronic inflammation. And if they have a lower GlycanAge, this means less low-grade chronic inflammation. And what we learned by studying, as I said, over 100,000 people in this context, is that generally this associates with unhealthy lifestyle. So people living healthier life will have a lower GlycanAge than their chronological age, while people living unhealthier lifestyle would have a higher GlycanAge.
Very good, Gordan. So let's talk about what I can expect when I do a test, because as you know, we've talked about already the fact that GlycanAge is different from perhaps epigenetic tests that are in the marketplace. But what would I expect when I do the test, and how quickly will the results be coming back to me?
So I believe the results, depending where in the world you buy the test, because the GlycanAge is being sold globally, and everything comes to our central laboratory in Zagreb, Croatia, is that then it will be 3, maybe 4 weeks before we can send the results back. So in the lab, it takes approximately 2 weeks to do all the chemical processes to measure that, and everything else is logistics, getting sample in and out. And then you get back a number. Actually, you get in multiple numbers, but the ultimate simplification is just the GlycanAge. And this number is, we call it the glycan index of biological age, which does not have a golden standard. You know, there is no golden standard of biological age. So we don't know how really accurate this number is and what even accuracy means, because we don't know what is biological age. But what we know is that this is something which will change depending on your lifestyle. And usually when somebody does a test and get their first number, they're either happy or unhappy. And personally, I think people who get a bad result should be happy, because glycans change up to a decade before people develop different diseases. Because, you know, what is a disease? Disease is something that you feel pain because some of the organ systems does not work, and then you go to the hospital and ask for help, and then you get a name, a diagnosis. You have diabetes, you have inflammatory bowel disease or whatever. And this is just the end point of a long molecular process, which at least we have shown that for glycans, it takes over a decade. So glycans become pro-inflammatory up to a decade before you actually get diagnosed. So if I'm healthy and my GlycanAge is bad, this would mean there is a molecular process happening within me, which is causing damage. We know it's causing damage because we know these molecules are promoting inflammation, and I'm still not aware of the problem. This will ultimately result in a failure of one of the organ systems. We cannot say which one, whether it would be inflammatory disease, metabolic disease, whatever. We don't know what, but we know there is something going on which is negative, and we know it's negative because it's too much inflammation, which can be affected by my lifestyle. And then if I have a bad result, I have to think why. So what am I doing wrong that there is too much inflammation going on in my body? And also GlycanAge as a company provides consulting. So within the, as you buy a test, you get also, I think, half an hour of consultation service with some of the specialists who can look at your lifestyle and say, you know, maybe you should think about your physical activity. You should think about the way you look at the world, so your psychological state. Maybe you should think about potential hormone deficiency, especially what happens with age. Both men and women start to lose the sex hormones, and maybe they need to be supplemented or whatever else. So you have a problem. You don't see it yet because nothing is hurting, but there is a molecular process which will eventually lead to the disease. And you got an early warning, maybe 5, maybe 10 years before this happens, you get a warning something is wrong. And then you can try to live healthier. But here we have a major problem, we as humanity. And this is that all research is always done with the assumption that there is a standard human. So that we study an intervention, and then we take 1,000 people, and then we decide this intervention helps or not. And it can be a diet, it can be a drug, it can be whatever. And more we do research, more we learn that there is no standard human. We are different. We are different in many ways, and we don't all respond to the same drugs. And I think, you know, in the medical community, I think everybody is now accepting that up to 80% of the smart drugs don't work in everybody, meaning they work in 20% of people, 80% of people do not benefit from them. Some other drugs will work in them. But the same is true for lifestyle interventions. The same is true for diet. So if you think about the dietary recommendations in the last 3 decades, they went upside down from you have to eat as much carbohydrates as possible to now avoid carbohydrates. They're dangerous. And I think the reason why we are having such a confusing messages is that people are different. Follow-up of this study was to put people on different diets for the next 6 months to see whether they will manage to maintain this weight loss. And what we have learned is that independently which of the diets people were assigned to, and this was randomized, some people would benefit, some people would not. So there is no single magic diet which works for everybody. But there is a diet which works for me. I just have to find it.
Well, Gordan, I've had my own GlycanAge test, which I'm very excited to get the feedback on that. I haven't had it yet, but how does the GlycanAge test respond to lifestyle interventions, and what would you recommend is really the regularity in which you would do testing with the GlycanAge test?
So the key difference between GlycanAge and other tests which are available is that GlycanAge actually responds to intervention. So if you do something and this is beneficial, GlycanAge will change. It's a relatively slow change because it's a chronic measure. So, you know, if you're doing damage to your body for 20 years, you cannot expect it to change in a few weeks. So the first changes we usually see after 3 to 4 months. So when people change diet, start taking some kind of supplements which actually work, in 3 to 4 months, the GlycanAge will start to change. So if you try something with your life, so you start exercising, you start a new diet, you start a new supplement, I would test before you do it, and then 3 to 4 months after you start doing it, to see whether there is a beneficial effect. If there is a beneficial effect, you can continue and test it after additional 1 year or whatever. And if it is not, then you try something else. So unfortunately, it would be great to be able to say upfront what will work for you. And there is an entire field of nutrigenomics trying to do it, but we still don't know them, don't have this knowledge. For example, I did my whole genome. I read all the 6 billion pairs in my genome. I cannot read there, what should I eat? We don't have that knowledge yet. Glycans also cannot tell you what will actually help you. But glycans can tell you whether something is helping you or not. And I think this is a great tool to have something which will, after a few months, tell you whether you have a health benefit. Because, you know, one of the key problems we have is that generally we know what is healthy, but we don't do it. And we don't do it because the reward comes after too long for us to make a decision today. You know, I'm not going to do something today for a reward which will come in 20 years. I will do it tomorrow. I will do it next week or whatever. But if there is a metrics which is telling me on a regular basis whether something is good or not, this really helps to motivate people to change. And we've seen it many times with people that when they get feedback, they try to do something. And this can be, we had examples of people trying too hard, you know, doing too many different things, exercising too much, doing different supplements, and then actually just by reducing the number of things you do, things get better.
And let's talk about half of the world's population, Gordan. Less a question for me, but how can GlycanAge test help with the menopause and perimenopause? Because that's obviously a very interesting subject for a lot of our viewers.
Yeah, so it's one thing which is actually unbelievable is that you know, menopause is something which is not being actively researched. Not so many people do research on menopause, and for a long time, all the research was done only on men to simplify the study design because you don't have to think about the hormones and their changes. So we as a scientific community are really lagging behind understanding what is happening in that period. And one of the problems is that usually the period of perimenopause, so transition from the regular cycle to menopause, is not being properly diagnosed. So at the moment, there is no diagnostic test which somebody can do and get the data. You are at 30, 40, 50, 60% of this transition. And unfortunately, usually women get misdiagnosed. So they get a psychiatric diagnosis, they get a fibromyalgia, they got whatever other label the medicine can give them, and they get wrong treatment. Because no, menopause is a hormone deficiency. And if we are talking about men having a low testosterone, we'll give them testosterone. And if we are talking about women having low estrogen, we'll tell them this is normal. No, don't do anything, just suffer. So that's not fair. And I think, you know, if it's a hormone deficiency, it has to be treated, and it has to be treated in a way which is safe, which is not inducing risk, and which is tailored to a specific patient. And one way the GlycanAge test can help, and although at the moment this is still not a diagnostic claim because this is not regulated, this is not still registered as a diagnostic, but what we know from our research is that glycans attached to immunoglobulin are very strongly affected by estrogen. So low level of estrogen is making more pro-inflammatory glycans, higher level of estrogen is making less pro-inflammatory glycans. And somebody could ask, okay, but why don't you just measure estrogen? So why do you need a kind of a proxy measure instead of measuring estrogen? And the problem with estrogen is that it can, especially in perimenopause, it can vary heavily within a day, day to day. So if you just take a single number, it doesn't mean anything. It can be even higher than normal. You need to average for a long period of time. So people have to sample, you know, for days. And the IgG glycans are doing it for ourselves because IgG glycome is integrating estrogen concentration in the last 3 to 4 weeks. So you can measure IgG glycome composition and get information about estrogen concentration in the last few weeks. Very similar to the way we use HbA1c, or some call it just A1c, glycated hemoglobin, to estimate the glucose load in the last couple of weeks. Then you think about, okay, maybe it's a hormonal problem. Maybe I can try a hormone replacement therapy. And then most of the women respond well to hormone therapy. Some of them still don't. And then glycans, again, can help there. So maybe it's a different dose, it's a different way of taking hormones and so on. So it's really informative in this female health space. But as I said, this is still not formal diagnostics. It has to be registered as a diagnostic to be used as a diagnostics, but it can be very informative both for the patient and their physicians.
Very good. Well, I guess, talking about that then, Gordan, what do you think about biological age testing and really making that a standard part of regular health checkups? I mean, do you feel that this is something that needs to be happening now? Or are we moving towards this as a combination of the longevity industry meeting the traditional healthcare markets and MDs and clinicians around the world?
So we are actively working in that direction, moving glycomics in general, not only the IgG glycans and the GlycanAge, but all the other forms of glycan analysis into diagnostic space. The clinical chemistry or clinical diagnostics is a very conservative discipline. It takes a very long time to accept a new test. So it will take quite some time to be to accredit all the instruments, all the reagents, all the individual tests, and validate them as IVD. Especially this is now becoming difficult in Europe with the new IVDR directive, but we are going in that way. And in a decade or in 15 years, IgG glycan composition will be a routine preventive test like HbA1c or glucose measurement or something like that. So this will happen. It will take time.
Right. Well, Professor Gordan Lauc of GlycanAge, thanks very much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
It was a pleasure talking to you.